Welcome to our third video in this series on summarising the evidence around effective professional development. In this video, we will look at the first part of recommendation 2, which is the most substantial recommendation within this guidance report. So the review underpinning this guidance identified 14 mechanisms which we can split into 4 different groups. And those groups are building knowledge, motivating teachers, developing teacher techniques, and embedding practice. And this vignette from the guidance report is probably where we are now. So if you can just pause the video and read this. So having watched the first 2 videos, you may be thinking the same. What does each mechanism entail and how do I use this? What kind of a combination do I use? On the website, you'll find this as a poster version that you can download, but it's a handy infographic about the mechanisms and how they're divided across those 4 themes. So those themes are how we structure and build our knowledge. So something like a retrieval quiz at the beginning of a session might fall under this heading. It's then our motivation to act on that knowledge as teachers. It's about giving teachers the tools they require to take action and apply these techniques in their classrooms. And it's about supporting teachers to embed their practice. Just a quick side note here, some of you may want to read the underlying evidence review, and if you do, you'll notice that the review names these groups slightly differently. So that talks about instill insight as the first group and motivate goals as the second. In the guidance report, they've made the names a bit more accessible, so we're going to use the names that are in that guidance report. So we have the infographic version on the website, but I've just put them into a linear format in this table. So these are the 14 mechanisms identified by the review and discussed in the report. The review looked for mechanisms which there was evidence that they were causally active in bringing about behaviour change in several areas, including health, education and sport. And they were looking for mechanisms where there were examples in the professional development studies that they reviewed. So importantly, we're not saying that these are the only mechanisms that will ever be found, but across the 104 studies of professional development dating back to 2002 that made up the underlying review, these were the 14 that fitted both the criteria of they were causally active in bringing about behaviour change and they were in the studies that were being reviewed. So we think it's a useful step forward in thinking about professional development. As somebody that may be responsible for professional development, it's worth you reflecting on a programme that you've run yourself or that you've been involved in as a participant, and maybe perhaps auditing which mechanisms you think were used in that programme. So in this video, we're going to focus on the mechanisms that fall under build knowledge and motivate teachers. In the next video, we'll look at developing techniques and embedding practice. So if we start with building knowledge, the aim of this group of mechanisms is to help teachers gain a new evidence-based understanding of teaching, their students or themselves. When designing and delivering professional development, it's important to present new knowledge in ways that support understanding. And we have to pay attention to how we structure and build the knowledge that's taught throughout any professional development programme that we're doing. So the 2 mechanisms identified here that are likely to improve professional development are managing cognitive load and revisiting prior learning. So when we're presenting new information, we need to think carefully about how we're going to manage the cognitive load of participants. And some ways of doing this might include removing less relevant content or using multiple examples to illustrate. We might include strategies such as dual coding in our presentations. And we know professional development is more likely to be effective when we're designing it to ensure that we revisit topics or techniques, that we quiz participants on intervention from past sessions, or we use tasks where teachers might be drawing on past learning. In the guidance report, we've got this case study about building knowledge, English mastery. So this case study is for this specific group of mechanisms. So pause the video and have a read of it. So moving on to the second group of mechanisms, once teachers have built knowledge, they then need to be motivated to act on that knowledge. There are 3 mechanisms that have underlying supporting evidence for this stage, and they are setting and agreeing goals, presenting information from credible sources, and providing affirmation and reinforcement after progress has been made. So with setting and reinforcing goals, the reviews have demonstrated across a variety of behaviours that setting goals substantially increases the likelihood of behaviour change. When we make conscious, specific and sufficiently difficult goals, we are more likely to improve our performance. The next mechanism on presenting information from a credible source links back into recommendation 1. So where information comes from affects how motivated teachers are to use it. And the more credible the source, the more likely they are to change their practice. So anybody developing and facilitating professional development should think carefully about how they present and make the case for a particular change in teacher practice based on evidence. And the final mechanism in this group is providing affirmation and reinforcement after progress. So this could be verbal, it could be non-verbal, but it should come after the change has been attempted. So it's different to prior encouragement. And as somebody that might facilitate on professional development programs, we find that credible sources doesn't often feature in a lot of training, almost like the assumption is that teachers aren't bothered by the underpinning evidence that informs a technique, but they need the underpinning evidence to perhaps understand why a technique might be going wrong. They need the underpinning evidence to know that we're not just picking fads and fashions in terms of our professional development. We've all had our fingers burnt in the past with brain gym and learning styles, and we need to provide some credible sources of information so that teachers trust the decisions that we're making. So some examples of how to motivate teachers in professional development. We need to be careful about making bold assertions and unsubstantiated claims about impact of methods. And these are some of the ways that we might present information from credible sources. And these are the places that we might go to find those credible sources. So this is all better than anecdotal or unsupported impact statements. We need to be careful about saying that something we're implementing is having impact if we're not basing that on robust evidence. And in the guidance report for this group of mechanisms, there's a case study about the embedding formative assessment programme. And I've highlighted there the most relevant paragraph here because you might already know some of the details of that programme. So pause the video and have a read of the information in that box. So as we noted previously in recommendation 1, these are places that are good to go to for trusted sources. So these are essentially the people that are doing the heavy lifting of assessing the evidence, being critical of how it was done and the claims made, and then translating that into something that's digestible for you in a relatively neutral way. And also, just because something is widely used doesn't mean that it's evidence-based. So we do need to be careful about our trusted sources. So we've talked in this video about 2 of our 4 groups, one based on building teacher knowledge and the other based on motivating teachers. In the next video, we're going to think about giving them the tools to act on this new knowledge and how to embed that in practice. Thank you for listening.